Everyone, my name is Corey McEnroe. If you didn't know that, if you already knew that, then you probably know what happened to me in the past 15 months with a crazy injury that led to a even more crazier situation, which was the amputation of my thumb and index finger. So I wanted to start clearing up exactly what happened and share with you some of the really cool things that I've learned from this whole experience. So first and foremost, what happened was I was playing baseball, center field, ball got hit into the right center gap. I broke on it. I reached out and caught the ball, but there was a fence right here. Didn't realize that. Turned and smashed into it going full speed. Now, usually that wouldn't cause someone to eventually lose their thumb, but I was born with an extra 13th rib in my neck area here, and because of the impact, that rib reached over and pressed onto my clavicle artery. And over 6 months, that cut off the circulation into my thumb, and my thumb died on my hand. And then eventually we had to amputate my index finger to close the wound that was cutting my thumb off my hand. So that whole process was I ran into the fence. I caught the ball but dropped it because I ran into the fence. And then I finished the inning. I took another at bat and I drove home and I went to work the next day, and I even had like a waffle print on my face. That's all I really thought it was. I even posted that photo on the internet in case some people remember that, but I didn't really think much of it. And I about 3 weeks later was working with a cannabis grow operation because it's legal out in Arizona, and I was trimming and I was using scissors with both hands basically every day for 8 hours a day, and I was getting a lot of cramping in my hand, and I thought that it was from like carpal tunnel from trimming. So I just right away was not thinking that like I am losing blood flow into my hand. So at the same time I'm trimming, I'm also about to start coaching a 13U baseball team out there because I was a baseball coach out there. That's why I was moved out there to coach baseball, because there's so much baseball in Arizona, so much youth baseball. So I was coaching the 13U team, and because I worked with my hands on cannabis 8 hours a day, I smelled, which wasn't, politically correct for the situation I was doing after work. So I switched jobs. Ironically, because there are so many dispensaries out in Tucson, I got a job at another dispensary, but in the storefront where I was just helping people get sales. I didn't have to touch anything, so I didn't smell. So I was able to coach, and I had a day job in the morning where I was working, legally selling cannabis. And then I would do lessons in the afternoon, private lessons with private clients, private students, and then I would coach in the evening. So I had a really full day, and I had a lot of responsibility to a lot of different people, and I just didn't know what to do with the fact that I was having on and off pain where I couldn't feel my thumb. It would be really strange. My hand would get numb. It would kind of hurt. But here's another thing. I also, when I was younger, would get low circulation, bad circulation in my hands and feet, especially when we would go sledding. If my hands got exposed to the straight snow, I would be wailing in pain. So I just kept thinking I was having like flare-ups of a previous disease. I just did not understand what was going on. And the symptoms would come and go. Like I said, anytime I told somebody that it was happening, by the time I could like see them to show them, like one of my students' fathers is a doctor, so when he would come and pick a student up from the lesson, I wouldn't be in pain anymore. But like earlier in the day, I was. It just was the strangest thing to me. Also, I am an athlete, and as an athlete, I'm kind of taught. This may sound silly, but if it's not like broken or cut open and bleeding, keep going. And I was always able each day to keep going and keep trucking forward. So September was getting kind of bad. October, I went to a doctor, and he did a nerve test on my forearm and hand, and said that the nerves were actually firing above average. So it wasn't a nerve thing, and that I he said it could be up here, but we didn't do anything after that. I just got sent. There's the door, and told you're young, you'll be okay, and it's not that big of a deal. And then November came, and I felt some pretty serious pain sometimes, but I was living on my own. This may sound silly again. I have three cats. Felt responsible to them. I didn't know who was going to take care of them if I had to check into the hospital. I didn't even know how to check into a hospital. I also didn't have a primary care physician, which I didn't even know what that was until this process came about in my life. I did not understand what a primary care physician is, and that's one of the things I'm going to touch on in these whole series of talking to you guys, is like how to prepare yourself as a young adult to take care of yourself when something crazy is happening, because something crazy was happening to me and I didn't know what was going on. And that is something I'd like to bestow upon everyone, is how to prevent that from happening to you. Get a primary care physician. Anyway, so December rolls around, things are starting to get pretty bad. I go to an urgent care on December 20th, and the urgent care doctor had two people, me, who had this injury 6 months ago, and I was complaining about on and off symptoms, and he had this one woman who was having like kidney failure. So he, once again, like the other doctor, was like, you're not really, you had like an injury previously and you're here now, like what's going on? Like if it was that big of a deal, like why didn't you go many months ago? You must be fine. So he let me go, and about 2 weeks later, on January 3rd, my thumb basically turned purple, and I had to get rushed to the hospital. And the first thing we did was this thing called a carpal tunnel release, where they cut open my forearm, and they had to leave that open and then re-stitch it up 3 days later. So that was two surgeries in about 8 days, and I went home. Then my thumb actually got more black, so I went back to the hospital. I'm like, yo, the thumb is getting blacker. And then they sliced my groin open and snaked a catheter up here and went into my shoulder and pulled out more clots, because there was clots in my elbow and clots in my shoulder. And then I had to wait a week in the hospital, which was the longest week of my life. And you don't get sleep in the hospital. It's the strangest thing. You don't get any sleep in the hospital. You don't get a lot of rest in the hospital. It's so weird. I could go on for a long, long time about it, and eventually one of these days I will. But yeah, you don't get a lot of sleep in the hospital. It's so weird. So long week, and then eventually we got the right team of doctors to do the surgery where they actually took the rib off of my clavicle artery. So that was 4 surgeries in January, and then February was just waiting to get the thumb amputated. It got amputated the day after Valentine's Day, the 15th of February, and then we waited about 6 weeks to see if it was going to close and heal, and it didn't. So in early April, on April 10th, I had to get my index finger cut off and re-sewn back down to close the wound. The skin re-sewn down, and then it was just get ready to move home and move back to New York, because for me it was very clear that my time in Tucson was done and I needed to go home and kind of regroup with my family. So one of the really cool things was my student's father asked me to help out with his son's baseball team, the Little League team, because they were losing a bunch of games and he was having a tough time just getting them going. And he knew that not only did I know some of the kids on his team, I'd given like 4 of the kids on his team lessons already, that I would be able to kind of help the kids. I'm a good baseball coach, not to toot my own horn, but I love it, And it was a really awesome 3 months. It was really awesome from March, April to May. It was so much fun. And we really excelled, and we made a late little playoff push and almost knocked off a better team than us, and like it was cool. That's what sports are all about, you know what I mean? Just even if you don't win the whole thing, improving enough to get better to almost beat that team, or even beat that team that beat you. That's what's really cool. So when this happened, that was one of the first students I gave a lesson to once I felt good enough to come back to give lessons, healthy enough. And I told him what happened. Obviously, they knew a little bit, but he was the first one to see it in person. And he told another friend of his who his son plays with, Noah, and he is a lawyer, and he was able to get me hooked up with the best med malpractice team in Tucson, and it's just crazy. It's just crazy because like my dad always told me that like sometimes you just got to do stuff for free because like you love to do things and like you never know what's going to happen because it's really all about relationships. Life is all about relationships. Life is all about making relationships. So I made a great relationship in March, April, and May, and then, much later, literally a year later, literally 13 months later, um, that person is hooking me up with a law firm that could possibly help me out with this whole crazy situation. So it just brings me to life is beautiful. And the relationships that you make are so important, and you don't realize just being your genuine self how impactful that is. And I've always just been a passionate, caring person, and I love what I do, and I love baseball. And it's bittersweet that this happened from baseball, and it's bittersweet that I can't ever play baseball again. But I'll be okay. And like I said before, there's a lot of really cool things that this has taught me that I'm excited to share with y'all. But I'll just leave this one here, there, right there, here, there, everywhere, and the next one I'll talk more about what's going on with the lawsuit because I think this is a good place to leave it off. And yeah, so you know do things because you love it, and you never know what's going to happen. Peace, y'all.